Okay, we'll go ahead and get started. Welcome to the first meeting of Scottsdale Parent Council of the new calendar year 2025. We'll start our meeting with the Pledge of Allegiance, and the flag is over here behind me. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, with liberty and justice for all. Okay, and then we have our land acknowledgement. As we gather for this meeting, let us take a moment to reflect on the meaning of place, and in doing so, recognize the various traditional lands on which we do our business today. We wish to acknowledge this land on which this SPC meeting is taking place. For thousands of years, it has been the traditional land of the Hohokam, the Akimel-O'odham, and most recently, the Salt River Pima Indian community. Today, this meeting place is still the home to many indigenous people from across Maricopa, and we are grateful to have the opportunity to live and work on this land. Okay, today's meeting will begin, as we always do, by asking questions to Dr. Menzel. If you have any more, I have a bunch in the basket, but if you have a question, please write it on an index card and come bring it to me in the basket. Our speaker today is Alexis Sussdorf, and she's going to talk to us about what's happening down at the state legislature that will directly impact our schools. We're actually going to flip the agenda a little bit because Alexis will be here around 9:20, so we're going to do probably executive board updates after the Q&A with Dr. Menzel, and then we'll end with representative updates at the end.
Morning, everyone.
Okay, first question is, are you going to adhere to any new state laws or executive orders pertaining to schools, gender, and curriculum?
So the school district complies with state and federal statute. We're required to do so. So that answer is yes, we follow the law.
Okay. The Arizona state standard for a child who is behind is showing growth during a school year, regardless of how far behind the child is. Why does SUSD not hold themselves to a higher standard?
Can you read that again?
Sure. The Arizona state standard for a child who is behind is showing growth during a school year, regardless of how far behind the child is. Why does SUSD not hold themselves to a higher standard?
So I'm not sure what that question means, really. So if someone wants to explain the question.
Or maybe a higher standard than what the state requires? Yeah. Growth.
I would say that our goal always is, if a student's more than one grade level behind, to accelerate their learning so that they can catch up. That's the goal. So the state has its metric. That growth indicator is used to determine a building's grade. But for the district, our goal is to accelerate learning. So when kids are more than one grade level behind, that's the goal. We expect at a minimum you get a year's worth of growth for a year's worth of instruction, but the goal is to accelerate.
Okay, this question is about dyslexia screening. With 1 in 5 people having dyslexia and it being a complex disorder, why does SUSD screen using a computer and a computer screener that only tests for the stereotypical manifestation of the disorder?
So I would have to bring in our people to give a more specific answer. But my understanding is that we use the tools approved by the state. And so I just need to look into that question. I don't know the specific answer.
Okay, rumor has it, are there any campus closures coming in May? And when would we know if it's a maybe?
So I love rumors. My expectation is there'll be no closures in the upcoming school year. That doesn't mean never, but there's a process that we're utilizing, looking at the enrollment in all of our schools, and we have a handful that are under-enrolled based on their size and capacity that are areas of concern, and they know that. We've been working with them on strategies for how do we grow enrollment on those campuses. There has not been, at the board level, a direction or determination that we have to close schools quickly. And the risk in closing schools is that you get this downward spiral, because you're not necessarily going to capture all the kids that you had in that school. They aren't all necessarily going to go to another Scottsdale school, so you lose enrollment. You still have expenditures for any building that you close because you can't just shut the heat and electricity off in a building that's no longer being utilized. So there are a lot of variables to consider. So our work this year has been to target growth with those schools in particular, give them an opportunity to do so. If we don't see that, then we have, at least administratively, some timelines for when we would bring recommendations to the governing board for the 26-27 school year, and that would need to be early. So sometime before the end of the calendar year, we would be having that conversation about we haven't seen enough growth and we may need to close a school, but that would be for the 26-27 school year, not for 25-26.
Okay, this is related. Citing declining enrollment, Mesa Public Schools has announced that they're laying off staff next year. Is this something that could be in SUSD's future?
Well, in our future, it's always the possibility. Mesa's looking at a projected loss of 1,800 students and some other financial pressures, and so they've moved to issue a larger number of layoffs. For us, we believe, like last year, we'll be able to manage most of it through attrition. Doesn't mean there won't be any layoffs, but it will be probably isolated here and there, not like Mesa's doing that's at scale. If we lose more students than we expect, that could necessitate some additional changes. Our goal is always growth, attract and retain both students and staff, and build the system so that we don't have to do that. But right now, we're not looking at a Mesa-type situation.
Okay. Maricopa County Community Colleges filed a lawsuit against the county over the property tax refunds. Is SUSD going to join a suit, or what's in our future?
We filed a notice of claim with the county, working with the same law firm that MCCCD is using. The county has until February 11th to respond to that notice of claim, and they have not done so yet. We don't anticipate they will. So then the governing board will have to make a determination if they want to proceed with a lawsuit. It would be a separate lawsuit from the community college district lawsuit. A judge could join them together because the arguments are essentially the same, but they would be filed separately. So the board would decide in February, March if we're going to proceed.
Can you explain what those why they're suing, what the argument is?
So with the Quasmeyer lawsuit, what the courts found is that the county assessor inappropriately levied assessments on parcels for an extended period of time, like 2015 to 2022 or something ridiculous. And even though during the course of that time, the assessor was challenged, and the courts initially ruled that this was an inappropriate categorization. The assessor continued to do so, continued to levy the property taxes. And then when the final judgment came down, it was the cost of the overpayment and interest that was then recaptured from all of the taxing entities that were impacted: school districts, municipalities, fire organizations. And for Scottsdale, it was $24 million. Almost $5 million of that is interest cost. So we understand that the overpayment of taxes by property owners gets refunded, and we understand that even though we had nothing to do with it, this is all the county assessor, and they determine our tax rate, they determine what gets collected. So it wasn't anything that the school district did. We've got to refund that. According to the way the county is recapturing the funding, they're also putting us on the hook for the interest cost. And that's where we have an issue. County assessor had been told it was inappropriate categorization, never made a change. So those interest costs are a product of a decision that was made at the county level, not at the district level. So we're not contesting that we have to refund essentially the principal, the amount of the taxes that were over collected. We are contesting the fact that that interest cost should be borne by individual taxing entities. So if the county can screw up and then say to any individual taxing authority within the county, you have to pick up the tab for our screw up, that's a problem. County should own the interest cost associated with their issue, not our issue. We'll not contest the principal, but the interest is really the core issue.
What is the proposed high school exit exam, and how would it impact SUSD's high schools?
So I don't know that anything has been discussed outside of the ACT that's currently being given. So it would really be a matter of determining what the pass rate would be in order to be able to get that. And I haven't heard any numbers thrown out there yet. So I think conceptually it's this, we should have one. And I haven't heard anyone suggest an alternative to the ACT, which has now been, since maybe 2019, given to every high school student.
Okay, that was.
I have one question. I know there's a nationwide teacher shortage, and I know that we are struggling with that here in the district, but I know specifically we're struggling with language instructors. What is the district doing to address that specifically?
So the HR department has been working with a company that helps identify native speakers from other countries who have teaching credentials and want to teach here. And so that's one strategy to be able to address some of those concerns. We know that online language instruction is not optimal, and while some people do it, it's just not really the best way to learn. And so Dr. Cruz has been working with a company that I think she's worked with in the past to be able to find people who can fill those positions.
You told me when you have to leave, so we can ask these
I'm
two
good.
questions. I know.
I'm good.
Okay, so is increasing class size an alternative to laying off teachers?
So that's a nuanced answer. Class size matters in terms of the number of staff we have. And we have within the agreement with the Scottsdale Education Association, and even within our own policies, target ratios at the various grade levels. And because of how the maintenance and operating override vote was worded, it's maintained class sizes. So to grow class sizes would be contrary to what's in the M&O override. But not every school has classes that are at that ratio. And the ratio is the target, and then there's a provision for, a plus or minus delta, right? Because if you're one student over the ratio, that doesn't mean you hire a new teacher. You have to have some balancing mechanism. So where in the past we might have looked at large classes in an elementary, say fourth grade with 28 or 29 kids, and say, we can hire another teacher so that we're not going to, when we get into the next year, expecting that we might have some growth, that you cover it. We're not hiring those teachers now. We're waiting until we see the students. Because if you end up with 3 at 28 and 1 at 29, you probably don't hire another teacher. Because if you do that, then you're driving down those fourth grade classes to 22 or 23. And that's wonderful, but you can't sustain that across all 29 buildings. And so we're trying to calibrate so that we're closer to the top end of the ratio, even though that's not always perceived to be optimal from a teacher perspective. From a financial perspective, it's how you protect positions.
Okay. Do you anticipate an influx of students with the displacement of Los Angeles families?
So we've already seen some families that have enrolled because their houses have burned down, and we anticipate that we'll have some. The question is how many. For people who are looking at potential years for rebuilding, if they have family members in the valley here, we may have some of those relocate. Will we have permanent relocations? That's a good question. You might know that there's a housing shortage, just like there's a teacher shortage, and especially affordable housing. So I think we'll see some. How many? I don't know it's enough to fix our declining enrollment problem, but yeah, we'll see some.
Okay, I think that's all of our questions. Thank you so much.
All right, well, thank you all for being here. I appreciate that. Alexis is fantastic at what she does. She knows the people, the players.
Oh yeah, can you tell us what she does for the district and why we need her?
Yeah, so long before I got here, the district used to have a lobbyist or a legislative advocate that the district hired. Many larger districts have their own. Some do it in consortium with others. And Alexis has an interesting background because she at one point worked at the Department of Education under Diane Douglas. Then she worked for Maricopa Community College District as their legislative liaison or lobbyist, whatever the title was, governmental affairs, I don't remember the title. And then she started her own business, and that's when I met her. In Scottsdale, while we in the past hadn't had someone since I've been here, and so we started last year working with her so that she can, and we are her only K-12 client. Now she works also for the Greater Phoenix Education Management Consortium. We're a member of that, but that's a different group and sort of a different function. She provides a lot of information to that group. There are times where the group will reach consensus on an issue of importance that she can speak with one voice representing 60 schools or so. But for Scottsdale, she works on Scottsdale-specific issues. Last year, one of the issues she worked on that didn't get across the finish line, but not for lack of trying, was removing some sunsetted language related to tax credits and being able to use that for capital expenditures. And there was interest. John Kavanaugh in particular was supportive, but we just didn't get across the finish line. Senator Kavanaugh has introduced that legislation again this year, and that issue was raised on a visit to Arcadia, where we had members of LD3 touring the buildings, and the principal talking about, here's what we were able to do because that tax credit functionality was available to us, and now it's going to sunset. So that's one example. Another of a successful was we had asked for, hello, Alexis, I'm just saying good things about you. Health insurance is a major sticking point. It's expensive, extraordinarily expensive for our staff. And as we looked at what the state offers and university employees get, we asked the question, what could school districts participate potentially? So Alexis was an advocate for the $250,000 that ended up in the governor's budget proposal and subsequently ended up being approved by the legislature. And that actuarial study was done at the end of December. It didn't provide any silver bullets, but it did provide some really useful information. So we still have a lot of work to do on health insurance. But it's those kinds of things where Alexis puts on an SUSD lens for part of the work she does as a multi-client lobbyist. She also represents other organizations. But what we pay for is someone who's going to advocate for Scottsdale Unified School District's interests at the Capitol, and she does that very well.
All right, thank you.
All right. It's all yours, Alexis. I'm going
right.
to the Blue Zone ribbon cutting up at Anasazi now, so sorry I have to run.
Thank you for the warm welcome. Am I just going to advance over here? Go. I can do it. Yeah. Just have this for my notes. All right. Awesome. Well, good morning. I think Dr. Menzel did a warm welcome, but Alexis Sustorf, I own my firm, State 48 Public Affairs, and I have the privilege of representing Scottsdale as well as so many other awesome clients at the Capitol. I've been doing this for 14 years now. I recently launched my firm a few years ago, and really I did that because I wanted to. I had done this space in a lobbying capacity for others and realized I can do this on my own and represent people and things that I believe in, and that's really been the values of my firm. And also, I'm also a parent of two in the public school system over in Mesa, so this topic is really near and dear to my heart. I've been working on really P20 education. I've done early childhood through First Things First. I've done K-12 through the Department of Education, and I've also done higher ed through community college, so I really sort of understand the P20 policy lens, and really that sort of foundational knowledge has helped me be really successful in representing Scottsdale. So I will just jump in. So our legislature looks the same, yet a little bit different. As you all are probably well aware, we have a Democrat governor, and then we have a Republican-led House and Senate. And that makes for a really challenging legislative process and challenging to get things through the process and signed. Our House and Senate, while they remain Republican majority, they did pick up seats in both chambers. So the last legislative session, we saw a really close 16 Republican, 14 Democrats in the Senate. This year, the Republicans did pick up a seat. And then in the House, we also saw really tight margins under previous legislatures, 31-29, and the House Republicans did pick up 2 additional seats. Why this is noteworthy is because when they have really tight margins, it's harder with really partisan bills for the majority to get things through, because there's always that one member that's like, I will vote for your bill if you give me this. So they certainly love a little bit more cushion in the Republican majority in the House and Senate for these really tighter partisan votes. For this legislative session, I fully expect to see a high volume of bills again. Typically, we see around 1,600 to 1,800, and we are certainly on track for that. Around 300, give or take, usually make it through the legislative process, and then because of the divide in government with the Republican legislature and Democrat governor, we have seen a high volume of governor vetoes over the last 2 years. For reference, we saw 73 vetoes last session, and in the one before that, I think we saw around 145, and that's pretty historic for Arizona. Just for even a better reference, under Governor Ducey, Republican, with Republican legislature, in his final year in office, he only vetoed 4 bills total. So we do see the governor exercising veto authority, just given this divide in government that we're seeing. So not necessarily relevant, all of these items to Scottsdale, but I just want to put on your radars, because you probably will see a lot of this in the media over the coming months about the work of our legislature and sort of key priorities. One I will talk about in length is Prop 123, the need to extend that. So I will table that one because it's a larger conversation. We're going to continue to see a lot of dialogue on water, both sort of urban water issues and rural groundwater. Housing, there's a big dialogue on housing affordability and trying to develop processes to make housing more affordable, which oftentimes leads to the state preempting cities on making policies, and it just gets a little bit uncomfortable in that dialogue. A lot of election bills. I mean, we have certainly been seeing a high volume of election bills, but this year seems to be like a phenomenal number of election bills, really trying to change the election process, to find, some believe, a better balance in having election integrity, but also faster reporting results, because Arizona is a little bit slow in our reporting results as a result of our election processes. And just a couple others: childcare funding, low-income childcare subsidies is a huge priority to many on both sides of the aisle. Criminal justice reform, this just sort of seems to be a theme of trying to revise some of the judiciary and be a little bit less punitive to offenders. And then behavioral health issues. These are just kind of some big themes you'll continue to see. There's a variety of deadlines that drive our work at the Capitol, but just putting some on your radar that really create some chaos at the Capitol and things that you may see and hear in the media as well. There are deadlines associated with bills being heard in their committees, in their original chamber, as well as the opposing chamber. So typically, that week of February 21st is just chaos. That week of March 28th is chaos. And then April 26th is our legislature's constitutional goal to complete their labors. That is the marker of the 100th day of the legislative session. Although they have not been sticking to that the last several years, or really the last decade. I think COVID's really the only time that they got out before that deadline. Last year we concluded on June 15th, and in the year before that, July 31st. So they are certainly going much longer than the 100th day. I joke, job security, but I certainly don't want to be at the Capitol in a suit in June and July. So it's got its give and take. So the legislature did kick off our session on January 13th. This sort of week is filled with sort of foundational things that happen each session. The first day always starts off with the governor delivering the State of the State address to a joint session between the House and Senate. And Governor Hobbs, delivered her address just to highlight sort of the key things in the education space. Her address kind of topic was the Arizona Promise and her vision on policies that can lead to delivering on the Arizona Promise: affordable housing, access to affordable medications, just some things that she thinks develops the best Arizona. The main topics in education was really education funding related, the need to continue to override the aggregate expenditure limitation, her interest in extending Prop 123, which is the state land trust dollars, which I'll get into in a minute. And then she talked, and it's been an issue on the table for a while, but her desire to reform the ESA program, and that seemed to be a dialogue in all of her speeches over the last couple of years. So I'm going to just get in and just trying to be informational to you all on some of the bills that have been introduced thus far. I will also note the color coding means if it's green, it means it's been through the committee process. If it's yellow, it means it's on a committee this week. I will note to you all a big reason to just sort of, if you hear one and you feel like you want to weigh in on this, at the end of my presentation, I will give a quick way for you to engage through the request to speak system. So again, just delivering the information, not trying to be partisan by any means, but these are the bills out there that are in this sort of education space, impacting parents, impacting students, impacting school districts. And some might be, as you perceive, better than others. So Senate Bill 1002, this is actually Senator Kavanaugh, who represents a portion of Scottsdale. This is a repeat bill the last couple years, but trying to eliminate use of certain pronouns in school. This has, again, been sort of a theme the last couple years and has not gotten through the process or yielded a governor's veto. Senate Bill 1003, also introduced by Senator Kavanaugh, also a repeat bill from previous sessions, trying to develop reasonable accommodations in multi-use occupancy restrooms. This is really kind of targeting female students who might feel more comfortable using the male, or male more comfortable using the female. So wanting to find that sort of reasonable accommodation situation in those very, very rare instances. I made 1007 big because I think this is one you all may have a keen interest in. And I know Scottsdale has found utilizing the public school tax credits for certain line items to be really helpful and instrumental, and had really great successes in building STEM labs, robotics labs, some of these things that utilization of the existing dollars aren't as helpful on. So I just point this out because this is one where parents might want to weigh in. It is utilized, so right now public school tax credits exist, $200 for single, $400 for a family. You can give it to your Scottsdale Unified School District school of your choice. And there are certain statutory provisions on how those dollars can be used. A couple years ago, they expanded those statutory provisions to include capital, school meals, healthcare supplies, playground equipment. Although that provision sunsetted, meaning they put an end date on using for these. And so this bill is just simply eliminating that end date to continue to be able to use public school tax credits for these items. So just point that out. Yep.
So this bill, before it sunsetted, is why Arcadia High School has a dedicated space for their robotics club, including furniture, and like she rehabbed a room, Dr. Dansky. So I would encourage you to talk to your principals and see what they have used tax credits for. This is specifically for capital improvements. So a lot of the other things that schools can spend tax credit dollars on are still available. So only capital improvements is what went away. And I know my kids go to Arcadia, which is why I know about Arcadia, but it's kind of a big deal to lose that pathway, right? That money pathway for capital improvements on your campus.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So my question about that is, whenever you make a contribution with tax credit dollars as a family, you pick the category, and so is this only from like the general category, or if you make the donation of $400 to gifted, for example, are they able to access those gifted funds to pay for things like this, or no?
I don't want to misspeak on how DOR categorizes those. I'm assuming these would fall into the same sort of, you can select the provisions in school aspect. I'm just sort of assuming how they would operationalize this. It would probably be similar. But because it just adds, right now there's the listed categories, and then it says, and then these categories for this time frame, so they're just removing the time frame. So it would fall in, it would look just like the existing process that DOR follows, meaning I think you could select the categories.
So they
with
do
these
respect
funds.
the categories whenever they're doing
Correct.
something like this. They say, okay, we're not going to take it out of field trips because we can't, kind of thing, right? Is that right?
I would actually say we should defer to or ask Shannon Crozer, because she will know. I'm going to let these go, and then so Dave and Shay, and then we're going to pause so Alexis can get through her presentation. I did not mean to open the floodgate.
I'm just curious. I know that there's a huge discrepancy in the tax credits from the northern wealthier schools to the, and when I say wealthy, I mean that the population of the parents and community is at a wealthier level than the southern schools. Has there been any efforts in understanding, like we know that northern schools, families having those funds know that it's a tax credit and they can write that $400, and when they do their taxes a month later, that $400 comes right back to them. The families in the South simply do not necessarily have the funds to be without $400 for a month. Is there any works to being able to share that money amongst the district equally, so you don't have $100,000 going to one school and $10,000 going to another? Or, I mean, obviously I'm making up those numbers.
Let me follow up on that one, because I am almost certain there is a provision that there is the ability to share that right now. And that was written in several years ago, but I can follow up on that question because I think that's been addressed, because the whole thing on tax credits that we hear often is the inequities for wealthier versus lower income areas. So I can follow up because I'm pretty sure that provision exists. Okay. Okay. Mhm. Mhm. Yeah. Okay. Yeah. No,
We
no,
could-
I can follow up
We
on
can,
that.
or we can also have a follow-up with
Yeah.
Shannon Crozier, because I think this is also something she could
Yeah.
speak to. Okay, last one, and then we're going to let Alexis talk again.
Almost a follow-up on the Arcadia question. I asked Kimberly how much it cost. She said about $10,000, maybe, give or take a few thousand. But a couple years ago, I was on the Anasazi Site Council, and they have close to 30,000 in their kitty built up over the years. You know, and it could be well used for, again, certain things that would benefit the school rather than.
Yeah, so tax credit, I think, are really useful for schools. So letting them spending on whatever they need is great.
Okay, so Senate Bill 1011, kind of typically not something related to what we weigh in on in election-related issues, but this one did add a provision through the committee that would require schools, if requested by a city or county, to serve as polling places, which I know some schools have expressed concerns on school safety associated with that. Some schools just might not have the space, traffic congestion, all of those sort of factors. So that one did pass through committee. It was a partisan kind of bill. I do anticipate, because there is interest to address some of these like late early issues, is what they say. Us folks who get our ballots in the mail don't actually put it back in the mail and drop it off day of, delays the election results. So this one will be a continued conversation, but the addition of schools being required to be polling places was a concern for a variety of issues. Yep. It is my understanding, this has been a bill that has been on the table for a decade now. They've been trying to require schools to do this. You know, in the same school safety, some of those pieces I've talked about have always kind of come up, and it's always been defeated. But they just, the counties are saying, we have a problem finding people to agree to be polling places. And so sort of the logic is, well, let's use existing, you know, public spaces that we have with taxpayer dollars. So it's more so the county saying we have this problem, and this problem is resulting in us not being able to have spaces, or us not being able to deliver a timely election, all of those. So it's not anyone, I think it comes from a good place, right? But schools are sort of pushing back, typically saying like this has bigger consequences than I think the pros associated with it. So okay, 1028, this one is actually going to be heard in the Senate Education Committee this afternoon. It is a repeat bill from the last couple years. Superintendent Tom Horn has been really vocal on wanting to reestablish a high school graduation requirement. And this would look like either the passage of the statewide assessment, and that threshold would be set by ADE. What does passage look like? Or the student could receive a CTE, industry recognized credential, or pass a CTE assessment. So this is trying to sort of reestablish a high school graduation requirement. Again, it's been on the table for the last couple years.
So
The current, yeah.
we have to talk into the microphone, or people can't hear on
Oh,
on the live stream. So the question was, what is the current requirement to graduate high school?
Yeah, the current requirement is set within the statewide standard. So there is no sort of passage that's developed within the local capacity if they're, yep, go ahead. There used to be, if you all remember, like maybe 15 years ago, there used to be one.
There's
Yeah,
no
it's
test.
just
It's just
yeah.
credits. Like you just have to get a certain number of credits in certain classes, and
Yeah,
then you pass.
and
So there's
yeah.
no test to pass. I think there's
At
a
this point in
civics
time.
test in
Yeah.
8th grade that's required, but that's the only
Which
one.
is
I think.
relatively new. Yeah.
what other states require an exit exam?
I don't know that, but I could certainly see, yeah. And you know, this one is definitely polarizing to some folks. It is well-intentioned, but I think, you know, there's a variety of reasons. The statewide assessment, some people question if the statewide assessment is even good. There's other bills that I'll get to that are trying to get rid of the statewide assessment and develop some more locally adopted assessments. So just that sort of general assessment concept is sometimes pretty triggering in the political world on both sides of the aisle. Senate bill, I'll keep going. Senate Bill 1041. This is authorizing the collection of school board member signatures through electronic versus the existing process, which is that paper. This is a similar process used for other offices, so there's belief that this should be seemingly streamlined, although nothing's ever easy. 1106, this is a semi-repeat bill from last year, although a lot of dialogue has happened to get it to a place of neutrality. It is applicable to all public entities, although really the crux of the bill is targeted to school districts. But it's enabling a civil liability pathway for school districts that fail to fulfill their statutory requirement for background checks or duty to report. Senate Bill 1133, another sort of repeat bill from last year, but requires specified teaching on communism and communistic regimes as part of the state academic standards. This exists now. Teaching on communism exists now in statute, although this bill is very like, this is what it has to say, so it's very prescriptive in how it's taught. Senate Bill 1136, this is also a semi-negotiated bill, but it's just adding through the background check process for non-certificated employees, so a lot of the classified staff, adding discipline history as a required field to be collected when they are seeking to employ these individuals. Couple more, and these yellow ones should be green because they passed last night, so sorry I didn't get to make that color change. They did pass through committee. 2019 requires schools to include enrollment packets, water safety education course information. That an amendment was added to ensure the Department of Education identifies those courses. House Bill 2020, another repeat bill from last year, but it requires school districts and charters to include teacher sort of retention-related information, and requires ADE to conduct annual teacher retention report information. There are nonprofits right now in the education space, the Arizona and Associations Arizona School Personnel Association. That's not the right acronym, but it's essentially the HR offices. They do something like this, so it's just sort of formalizing that, but and also through the Department of Education. House Bill 2022, this one was a bit of a partisan issue. It establishes a new optional training program called Save Our Children at School Safety Program at ADE, and really for emergency response training for active shooter situations and such. But then it also has a provision that can be a partisan issue associated with eligible schools are able to authorize an eligible employee to possess a firearm in a concealed carry capacity. Again, you can see the vote. It was a partisan vote of 7 Republicans, 5 Democrats. So it is, should it get through the process, it's likely to be vetoed, but it is one out there. Let's see. Yeah, go ahead. Here, let's.
I'll speak loud. Come on, sit here with the microphone. I notice a lot of these bills are focused on requirements for public schools, but it doesn't seem like they're making those same requirements for the tax-funded private schools. Is that something I'm catching on to correctly?
And typically the school realm also includes charter schools. So when I say schools, it typically, with a few exceptions, means school districts and charter schools. But you are right that this sort of ESA type of program schools are not subject to any of these. Let's see, 2029, another bill from last year, but it would require schools to provide internet safety instruction to students in grades 5 through 12. 2055, 2058, 2063, won't get into too much detail, but they're various sort of vaccine exemption related bills at schools. 2062, this one establishes definitions for sex-based terms. So male means this, female means this. It's applicable to all public entities, and it's really trying to tie to sex-related discrimination. So a male identifying as a female says, I as a female was discriminated against. That's what it's trying to eliminate. Do you see the fun I get to have at the Capitol? Go ahead.
Hang on, microphone.
I actually have one going back a couple slides. It said water safety. Is that referring to swimming? Okay, or water contamination. I wasn't sure what you meant.
Yeah, got it. No, that's a good point. Yeah, that's a good point.
So is there any, in that bill, is it just information, or is there any funding to like getting kids in the water, right? Because Arizona's drowning statistics are really sad.
Yeah, no funding associated with that right now. Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's just the requirement for ADE to have water safety, swimming water safety requirements, and then schools to annually include that in their enrollment packets.
No.
No.
Provide information to
They're
parents.
required to include in the packet the information on swimming water safety pieces. But what parents do with that, that's your choice, right? You can just toss the paper, or you could use that to enroll your kid. Mm-hmm.
So this is a requirement to include in the packet. Do we have any requirements for gun safety, lockup things? Is that or is it all about like the number one killer of youth?
It has been a topic at the Capitol the last couple years. I can follow up. I don't think anything got passed officially.
But there's a class that you opt into. I think it's under the suicide prevention space. Mm-hmm. So there definitely is some required, like the school district does have to offer, my kids took it, but like it's opt-in from parents, and so there is some education in that space happening, but I'm pretty sure it's under suicide prevention.
Okay, cool. Let's see, 2067, this is a continuation bill, so every so often state agencies and boards, sunset is what it's called, so they need legislature approval to continue their work. The School Facilities Oversight Board is a big entity that helps fund school in a facilities capacity. And they're up for a sunset, so they're continuing the SFOB for 2 years. I will just note 2 years is pretty low. Typically, it's 8 years. They've been going down to 4 because of partisanship, and now we're going down to 2. So to me, it's just kind of a sign of the divide between the Democrat governor and Republican legislature, and because SFOB falls under the executive arm, it's just sometimes a little bit more partisan. But there's also people did not like the audit findings in SFOB, and that is why they selected 2 years. Let's see, 2069, this was a bill, also should be green, passed through committee yesterday. It's a repeat bill from last year, but it just requires schools to report to the Department of Education, to post their instructional time models. 2074, this is one I just kind of point out, Representative Gress, he's been in some of these themes, but he's Scottsdale's legislator as well, and he's also the chair of the House Education Committee, so he definitely holds a pretty power position. 2074 is a repeat-ish bill from last year, although it has some new aspects as well. And it requires a variety of things. It requires officer training. This has to do with, This has to do with the Department of Education school safety program, which is funding that school districts can apply for SRO officers in school. Counselors. So this one makes some provisions to that program. It requires officers under that training to be trained on working with students of special needs. This is actually a really interesting provision. There's obviously a issue with getting public safety officers in as SROs just because of the workforce shortage. So this authorizes schools, if they are having access or trouble accessing officers, they can instead use those funds for school safety technology and infrastructure. So it's sort of a unique way to repurpose the funds if they are having issues getting officers. Let's see, the other piece of it that is noteworthy is it requires schools, if they are accessing these funds, to complete school safety assessments. They had it every 5 years. The original bill had every year, but it's every 5 years, and then does require annual or every 3 years school safety district audit. So being audited on their safety measures and what they need to do to improve. So this one did pass through committee. It was a bit of a partisan vote. Only one Democrat did vote for it. There's just some pieces that the Democrats want to continue to see in this. The specific piece I know of is they'd like to see the ability to fund school psychologists through this as well. So that seems to be some of the partisanship associated with this one. 2078, I mentioned assessments. This is actually one that goes the other direction in the elimination of a statewide assessment and the authorization of sort of a locally adopted assessment through, I'm not sure if you all are familiar, but years ago, there was this jig to create a menu of assessments. So instead of one assessment, the State Board of Education would give a list of assessments that schools could opt into. It actually leads us out of federal compliance because we're federally required to administer a single statewide assessment. But this is kind of back. I thought the menu of assessments might have fizzled out a little bit, but it is back and trying to re-administer that. There is also belief, though, that things could change at the federal level pertaining to this requirement on a single statewide test. So maybe this also could be sort of trying to see what happens federally, and then maybe if they make things change federally, then we would not, we'd be able to do this at a state level and not be out of federal compliance.
You'll see this slide soon, but our February meeting is state assessments.
2164, this one will get probably a lot of media attention. It already has really aligns with some of the federal interest as well under the new administration federally. But trying to prohibit the use of specific additives and dyes to school meal programs. 2167, this is Representative Gressier legislator as well. It has to do with, there's some frustration by members in general. I won't partisan it because it's kind of on both sides of the aisle, but some frustration on school districts when the Auditor General comes in, does an audit, gives audit findings. They're frustrated that they don't feel like schools take the audit findings seriously always. And there's been a couple that have been brought up to the legislature and had some really uncomfortable hearings about their audit finding and you know, pretty pointed questions on why they're not responding. So this is actually creating a process that if a school district remains non-compliant in their audit, a process to basically take 1% of their district monthly budget until they get into compliance. And then also, if they're not in compliance, their ability to apply for bonds and overrides would be impacted. Let's see, 2169. Sorry, I'm trying to remember. There's so many of them. This has to do with, again, I think it's probably targeted at a specific situation, but they're sort of running a bill to try to rectify it. It requires school governing board meetings and subcommittees to be held at the district versus an off-site location, and then materials to be made available online for 5 years. And then with districts over 5,000 students, so Scottsdale would certainly apply. The meetings have to be made available virtually and then also stored for 5 years. And then there's also been some issues that some feel like governing board members, not Scottsdale, but there's been some other boards that they feel like they are having lavish travels. I don't know if there's accuracy to this or not. So they're wanting in out-of-state travel to have board members have to get a majority vote of the board for those situations. 2170 requires with the IEPs, the students with with disabilities, to indicate if the child has been diagnosed with dyslexia. I don't know much about this one. I feel like that would already be a part of an IEP, so got to learn more, but this would require that to be notated in an IEP. 2172 would require ADE to develop training on sex trafficking and internet crimes and require schools to distribute this information annually. You know, similar to the water safety, it would have to be required in the enrollment packets. 2169 requires schools to have AEDs, so for cardiac arrest situations, it would require them to have it. It does include funds for schools that are 50% or more free or reduced price lunch schools, and then, but if you're not, it's an unfunded mandate. And then other training elements are required of schools associated with carrying of these AEDs. 2227, this is a repeat bill. It prohibits entities that are contributing to bond and override campaigns that stand to benefit from them. So there's a belief that some of these bigger construction companies and this is applicable to not just school districts, to any entity applying for a bond or override, but there's belief that some of these big construction companies contribute to these campaigns and then are the ones that stand to benefit, so they're trying to eliminate that. Go ahead.
For 2170, it doesn't have to state that they have dyslexia.
Okay.
They don't have to, it's called specific learning disability.
Okay.
Is what they categorize it as.
Okay, so this is a new, like this would be a new requirement. Okay, thank you.
2227, is that a new law they're trying to put in place?
Correct.
Okay, because I know Paradise Valley has violated that numerous times.
Yeah, I mean, they can do it now. I mean, right now it is a right of a construction company to contribute to bond and override campaigns. It's, you know, they're
For 2196, do you know, for the CPR training, do you know who or how many employees will be required to have that CPR training?
I don't know the specifics of that one. Sorry, I have not had a chance to dig into that one. That is a repeat bill from last year as well. And if you send out this presentation, actually all of these are linked to the actual bill. So if anyone has interest to like look at the bill and look at the text and the provisions, they are linked to the draft.
So I can put this on SBC's website.
I'll just share that I helped in leading the Scottsdale Parent Nutrition Initiative about 5 years ago, and at that time worked with Patty Bilbrey, and we were able to remove all food dyes from our schools. We were able to remove high fructose corn syrup, anything with any individual item with over 16 grams of sugar. There were lots of things that went into play, and a couple preservatives that were removed, so we might actually already be compliant, just so you guys know.
And honestly, it's my understanding a lot of schools have already taken that step because that's USDA guidance. I work on this issue with the food banks as well. I know Patty really well. So I definitely understand. I think it's the sort of nuances of those schools that don't have the luxury or the sort of administrative power to operationalize and read every label. But again, I think a lot of schools already are, like Scottsdale, it sounds like it's potentially one of them. And I've heard that theme quite often.
Would you happen to know what the breakdown is of private versus public enrollment? And the reason why I'm asking is because I'm concerned about this HB 2172, and it's requiring the sex trafficking and internet crimes. My understanding is that the majority of the sex crimes happen in church-related schools. So why is the public school being so targeted? But it's just reading, sorry. But the private religious schools are being exempt.
I couldn't give you I know the ESA program, so those that are accessing the voucher program sits at around 80,000 right now. I don't know how many go ESA, non-ESA, all of that included within private schools, but again, the ESA aspect, and that's applicable to both students attending private schools as well as homeschooling. And I can tell you that seems to be, so her question was for those online, what is the ability to influence, including private schools within that provision? That seems to come up nearly every one of these mandate type of bills. Somebody brings that up. If we're that, and the response is, if we're that concerned about this issue, this should be applicable to private schools as well. But the response has been from some folks that that's a slippery slope. That's none of our business to get into the provisions of private school work. So it is, I can say confidently, it is nearly brought up in every mandate bill, but the actual interest to do it isn't there. Yeah, sorry to be the bearer of bad news, but it is brought up a lot. Let's see, continuing. This 2302, so I mentioned the school facilities fund, specifically the building renewal grant, seemed to be really helpful for schools. And this authorizes accommodation schools that were built before 2014 to access the building renewal grant funds. I think there's concerns because there's not enough in the BRG right now, so adding a whole nother entity to be able to access those funds seems to be potentially concerning. Yep.
Can you go clarify what an accommodation school is?
Yes. So, and I don't know how they define, I don't know if there's a definition in here, although accommodation schools are, so a popular one that I know of are situations where a student accessing the existing sort of educational modality doesn't work. It's maybe students that have been previously incarcerated. It may be situations where it's a school where a special needs student was not able to access what they needed in the traditional public schools, so they go to these special schools. So it's a school that is targeted at accessing a population that the traditional school realm does not work. These accommodation schools are, I'm trying to, do you know if they're publicly funded? I'm trying to remember, because I know a lot of a lot of the accommodation schools associated with special needs students are third-party type of schools. So it's a private school, although it's more monitored than a traditional private school. So you pay, yeah. Yeah.
I'm so sorry. The school district, SUSD right now is paying an awful lot of money to a third party.
Yeah, accommodation. Yep.
Yeah, and I don't know the numbers on that, but I know that there are some discussions going on about possibly reopening one of the campuses, possibly, and
For
bringing
this.
in specialized staff for that.
Yeah. Yeah, okay. And I know that the accommodation schools, again, it's a situation where a special needs, a previously incarcerated, maybe a student who has dropped out or been expelled several times, maybe has discipline issues. They're in those types of situations. And they're just the traditional, Scottsdale school. This one over here is just not serving their needs for some reason. And so they access this third part. But they try in the original. That's, yeah. Exactly. Yeah.
They still live within our district, and so we are legally obligated to educate them, even though the local public school is not a good fit
Yeah,
for them,
exactly.
is not able to offer them what they need.
Yeah. And this has existed forever. These accommodation schools are not new.
Why 2014? Yeah.
Okay. Oh, so I'm thinking, I don't know exactly, but my kind of suspicion on this one is they made some major changes to the way that the school facilities unit and the building renewal grants worked in about 2014, 2015. And so maybe when they made those major changes, and they were legislative changes, there were some legal changes because there was, they think, some fraud going on. So there's major changes to the school facilities that happen around this time. And my thought is maybe when they made those changes, they were able to access the funds before, and then they made those changes and suddenly they weren't able to access them anymore. So that is my suspicion, because around that time is when School Facilities Board saw a major overhaul. Let's see, 2375, this requires a parent, so if a parent requests an IEP evaluation between May 1 and September 1, typically the summer months, the school is required to either begin that evaluation, or if they refuse to conduct the evaluation, notify the parent within 15 calendar days. My suspicion is this is probably more associated with the ESA program, and parents are able to access evaluations through the school districts for that ESA program. So this one might be tied to that, although it's not directly intended in the bill as is. 2484, this requires schools to have policies on internet usage, wireless communication devices, and the restrictions on social media platforms. 2609, this is actually a new one from this year, but it requires schools to enroll 6th, 7th, and 8th graders in advanced courses if specified criteria is met. There's a list of criteria. One is if they exceed in the statewide assessment. One is in their classroom assessments. If they're exceeding on those, there's certain specified criteria. And then it has some annual reporting required by schools should this go into effect.
I think that exists already in Scottsdale. My children went to Kokopah, or my grandchildren went to Kokopah, and you had to pass certain things, and they had, like, you could get into algebra rather than pre-algebra.
Yeah, and I think a lot of the urban schools probably do have this in place. I think it's going to be the rural school dialogue and either the inability to have these type of instructors, the classroom capacity for these types of situations. So this very well might not be as concerning to more urban schools than rural schools. HCR 2003, if you all are aware, the aggregate expenditure limitation is a spending cap set on school districts across Arizona, and it has been an issue now the last couple of years. There is a need to overhaul the existing AEL formula, but that has not been successful, so they've been doing sort of one-year override. So basically each of the legislature says it's fine, you can go over the state set expending cap. We are at it again. Everyone seems to be fatigued. There is always every year bills to fix this in perpetuity. It's just there's never been any appetite or agreed upon solution. So just bringing to your attention, you may know AEL well, I certainly know it well. We are at it again and going to be requesting another one-year override. So thankfully, Representative Gress acknowledges that we're not done on AEL, and we do need to get another legislative approval to exceed that.
What's the
spending
appetite
cap.
for overriding it for next year? Like, is it going to be a fight?
It is always a political bargaining chip, so yes, but I just wish it is a political bargaining chip that I would save. Just remember, we have a Democrat governor and a Republican legislature, so there is benefit to having that bargaining chip each year for the sort of transactional things that happen at the Capitol get things done. I would love a long-term solution. There's always long-term solutions out there. There's been a few kind of kicked around behind the scenes, but appetite for a long-term solution, I can say pretty confidently it's not there. The legislature certainly likes to have the authority each year to use this as a bargaining chip, but it will get done. Like, I'm not concerned. People get nervous, right? And every year people are like, they're not gonna do it. They're gonna do it. Like, I mean, that's just sort of my perspective is it would be devastating for schools if they didn't do this. They know the consequences. Even Superintendent Tom Horn, who he's been incredibly vocal on the need to override this. So it is known it needs to happen. It's just sometimes they like to stretch it to the end just for political bargaining chip reasons. And I would do the same thing if I was them.
I find it interesting that you say even Tom Horn supports the schools on this one. So I'm noticing a pattern here, and I'll just be transparent. I ran the last 2 overrides for the schools, and I'm noticing a pattern where there is a lot of bills that are making requirements of our schools, but not of the private schools that our taxpayers are funding. But yet these legislators in the Republican-controlled legislature, both House and Senate, have been majority run for the last 3 decades by Republicans, and we're at 48th lowest funded in the nation. So all these requirements, I don't see too many of them that say, oh, but we'll give you some funds to help out with that. Am I correct that very few of these are actually tied with additional funding, but they sure would like to tell us that we need to do additional things?
I would say most of the ones I've discussed are probably
continued
unfunded
attack
mandates.
on our public education. to try and find our weaknesses and exploit them.
You know, and I'll just say, some of these water safety, some of these are, to your point, they are important. But I think what's starting to happen, it's happened the last decade, I've seen it over and over, is water safety, this, EpiPens, this. It adds up over time. And so, again, all of these are vitally important, but they just it becomes such a massive Title 15 education statute that just doing what teachers are supposed to do to ensure kids learn becomes more challenging because they're having to do all these other things. And so, again, it's really hard at the Capitol. Some of these stories are tragic. The water safety one yesterday, I had to turn it off because as a mother of a young child, to hear some of those stories of moms is just like I'm getting goosebumps thinking about it. And those are all vitally important that, we ensure parents are educated on that. But it's hard when those keep coming, and it's really uncomfortable to lobby against, to go, all these parents walk up there and have these really tragic stories, and they bring tears to your eyes, and I can understand how important this is to them. And then you go up and are like, I oppose this bill because it's an unfunded mandate. Like, it's really crappy situation to be in. And trust me, like, I've had to be that person on not necessarily that issue. I was not directed by Scottsdale to work on that. I just give it as an example. But it is really hard to lobby against some of these things sometimes because some of these stories are just so incredibly moving, and to be the person that goes up and exactly. Yeah.
Can you tell us what Title 15 is?
Yeah, sorry,
And
Title 15.
Is there anyone like thinking about that, like how unwieldy it might become?
Yeah, so Title 15 is the Arizona Education Statute. There are several members that bring out the Title 15 book in the 90s, and it was about that big, and then you bring it out today, and it's like this big. For those online, I showed a really big book. And so, yes, there have been work. They called it the Title 15 Cleanup Committee. I've seen it many times. I did it in 2015. They just did one last year. There is a understanding that Title 15 is a colossal monster now, but every time they do this bill, these types of bills, they either see it as an opportunity for what's called a vehicle, because they see it as an omnibus. So they say, ooh, this is a perfect bill to stick on my stuff too. So they call it Christmas treeing. So this cleanup bill turns into all these additional laws because it's the perfect vehicle to amend stuff onto it. So I have seen many, many attempts at Title 15 cleanup. None have been successful. It's really unfortunate.
I think this is sort of a continuation on what Shay just said. It seems like Gress and Kavanaugh and I guess some newcomers are looking at ways to siphon off more money from our public education funds and putting it into their pet, siphonings like private schools, ESA funds, and it's the distraction work. It's a busy work for you. You have to lobby against all these, not silly, but certainly not beneficial on the whole to public school parents. And so, yeah, I'm sure you have another couple slides about more nuisance bills. That I'm not saying water safety is a nuisance bill, but certainly some of them are clearly just busy work. What can we do to actually improve get more money from the state or put forth things that are actually going to benefit us? Oh, I'm sorry, you have a very important job. A lot of it's fending off. What part of your job actually is about lobbying for us, not just fending off attacks?
Yeah, I think Dr. Menzel made a good point. The state health insurance are areas that I think are where we can be a little bit more proactive instead of reactive on some of these items. And you have to look at the sort of bipartisan issues. That's going to be where spending the time is most. And I'd say the health insurance is a great example. Folks on both sides of the aisles acknowledge that healthcare premiums for our school district employees and teachers is becoming a huge retention issue. And it is not just us saying it is a statewide issue. And so helping see those very few bipartisan issues and striking is where I think we can be most effective and where I enjoy most of my time playing offense on some of the good things. I will just say on all of these bills, I have not been directed by SUSD to directly engage a Scottsdale position on them, so I just want to make that clear. Although I do work with other organizations in education space that do have more direct engagement. Again, oftentimes I find the engagement more effective in sort of closed door, like, conversations to say, I understand why this is vitally important to you, and while like I can understand its importance, just remember, look at Title 15, these things add up. Also want to bring to your attention that if child sex crime is that important to you, maybe we should think about including it in private schools. So those types of things do happen, closed doors much more often in the sort of committee hearings that are much more public, but it is hard to find at this day and age, as you all probably know, it's hard to find those very few bipartisan issues, and when we do, we strike, and the health insurance was one of them. Not only did we get funding for an actuarial study, the results of that study are out, which I'll get to in a minute, and now it's sort of thinking about next step solutions towards achieving more reasonably priced health care premiums for our school district employees. So, yay, positive. I'm such a negative Nancy. But no, finding the bipartisan issues, very few and far in between, and then communicating those. It's a strategy. I've done it too.
I wanted to share something. I know Matt Gress. He's in my LD4, and I heard him speak numerous times about his number one goal for being chair of the Education Committee is to increase achievement. I've not seen one bill that does that. It does what these ladies are talking about. It actually takes away from it. It gives those teachers way more to do that keeps them away from achievement. Do you know anything about that? Because that was one of his platforms.
I will just say Matt Gress is one that certainly listens and takes time and speaks to constituents. So to her point on what we can do, set up a meeting with him. Give him a call. Send him an email. Because he needs to hear, some of these bills that you see his sponsorship, again, she'll send out the slides, but just say, hey, I saw these bills. I want to talk to you about them. Like, I heard your speech. I heard you making comments on what your goals are for schools, and I just want to understand how you see these achieving those. I think that's, and he is one to have those conversations. Now, will it move him? I can't speak to that, but so Prop 123 and AEL updates. So I mentioned Prop 123. For those that remember, in 2015, Arizona brought something to the ballot, asking to utilize additional dollars out of the state land trust for K-12 education. That was really a foundation to settle an ongoing lawsuit about education funding. The constitutional requirement out of state land trust for K-12 education is 2.5% of the state land trust each year goes to K-12 education. In 2015, they moved that percentage up to 6.9%, but it was for a 10-year window, so it's expiring June 30th of this year. So that 6.9% will revert back to 2.5%. But rest assured, because it was a settlement of a lawsuit, the $300 million that additional percentage brought is baked into the state general fund. So schools should not see a major cut in funding as a result of the change in percentage that's taking effect. I will caveat that with also, as part of the lawsuit, outside of the state land trust dollars, there was a $75 million annual appropriation out of general fund in addition to the state land trust to further settle the lawsuit. They considered it backfill payments. So that $75 million, as far as I know, is not going to be continued. So there is potentially a cut, just being transparent, that some may perceive it as a cut, others perceive it as that was backfill dollars, and that's not a cut because you all knew that was temporary and only intended for 10 years. So, it's how people perceive it. Some you could see in the media, 75 million cut. Some legislators have been very vocal to say that was never intended to continue after July 1, 2025. So just want to make that delineation. But the $300 million is baked in. There is interest on the table right now to extend Prop 123 again beyond the June 30th, 2025 deadline for new money for education. And this is one of those bipartisan issues that both sides of the aisle understand that this is one of our few opportunities, given the revenue outlooks, to get new money for education. But I will caveat, this is much harder than we all would imagine. There are two provisions that people are struggling with. The one provision is, what is the percentage out of the state land trust? What is everyone comfortable with? 6.9% with the last 10 years, 2.5% is the constitutional piece. We can't even find within party, within the Republican Party, the Democrat Party, what are they comfortable with in percentage? I've heard as low as 4, I've heard as high as 8.9. So task one is, what is the percentage that everyone agrees on out of the state land trust should this be renewed? So that is extremely difficult to find. A lot of people weigh in. We've got a lot of economists. We've got a lot of people acting like they're economists to figure out what that percentage is. I will say if they do end up getting this done, I feel like the percentage will just be kind of like, this is what we picked. I don't know if it will necessarily be based on anything. Obviously, they want to be responsible and ensure they're not jeopardizing the corpus of the state land trust. But other than that, what they end up picking is probably just going to be a number that is agreed upon. So state land trust dollars should this new money come into effect, this would be new money going to Scottsdale Unified School District. Depends on the percentage. Right now, I don't know the specific breakdown of how Scottsdale gets. I can get it, but it's substantial. It's $300 million currently in addition for the state. So say that they decide to continue the state land trust at the 6.9%, that would be $300 million additional for the entire state. How that impacts Scottsdale, I can let you know.
Where does the other 97.5% go before the last 10 years at 6.9?
So the 2.5% constitutional. So each year the state land trust corpus builds, and it's 2.5% each year out of that corpus. So it's not the 100% would be taking the entire corpus. The 2.5% constitutional and going up to 6.9 is just each year pulling that percentage from the corpus. So if it's, right now 100 million is in the corpus, and we're pulling out of the 6.9, it would be, that $6.9 million. So just, I think I might have confused a little bit. The 2.5 is just each year they look at the whole pot and say, let's just pull out 2.5. The next year that they look at the whole pot, they just pull out 2.5. Thankfully, that corpus has been super healthy. State land trust is developed through all of our state lands. A lot of them have land leases, specifically a lot of agricultural users, and they pay for those land leases. So those, that's where the corpus builds each year. And then also, some of the parks, some of the fees associated with the park, I don't think that's like super significant, but. Oh, other entities. Yeah, okay. So there are 6 entities that get it. I know community colleges get some. I know that, I can give a breakdown, but K-12 education gets the most significant amount for sure. But there are some other entities that benefit that. I can say though, this conversation of 6.9 is only, this conversation of new money is only targeted for K-12 education. So if they decide to renew it, as far as I know in the negotiations, all of these other entities that get state land trust dollars now are not a part of that conversation. It is just targeted to K-12. So should they extend Prop 123, all the entities getting state land trust dollars now would just continue their distribution as is. Any new money would be for education. Thank you. So percentage is one. The other caveat is the policy associated. There is a desire to continue, extend Prop 123, clean with just the existing distribution, which is just sort of base aid funding for schools. There is some legislative interest to add some strings to that, some wanting to, I call it uppercase blue text, but a lot of sort of new allocations of how that fund is allocated specifically for classroom teachers. There is just sort of a disagreement in the policy associated with and even within parties, right? I'll just say I've heard in the Republican side, there are Republicans that want to tie this just to teacher salaries, and then there are Republicans that are like, no, I as a state don't want to get in the business of teacher salaries because say for some reason something changes, who's going to point the finger when this goes away? They're going to point it at the legislature for cutting teacher salaries. So there's a disagreement in the policy as well, even amongst parties, because there are some that want it earmarked and tied and have all of these new requirements, and then there are others that are like, no, I just want to give them their money, and I want to stay out of it, because if anything goes wrong, they're going to point the finger at the legislature instead of the school district. So it's going to be an interesting couple of months to figure out. Yeah. Within the Prop 123 conversation, the main conversations have been having the cleanest policy as possible. And remember, this has to go to the voters. Whatever this has to go to the voters. And so it has to be something that voters can understand as well. Because sometimes when we get overcomplicated, research is clear that when you get complicated, a voter will just vote no. So we need to get something done. And then we also need to get something done that will win at the ballot, because back in 2015, it won by a hair. And so that is where people think, like, keep it simple, stupid. If you keep it simple, if you just continue at the 6.9, if you just continue to the distribution as is, it is a simple campaign to voters. We're just still doing what we're doing, and it's new money for education. But if you start to add all of these other things, it gets complicated. So, but in the Scottsdale world, a clean, simple, voter understandable package is the messaging, and that's sort of the messaging of all K-12, not just Scottsdale. But we want new money for education, and we want to win at the ballot, and we feel like something really simple and clean at the ballot is going to be a winner. That's sort of the message of public education. Say that again. Is it historical for Arizona legislature to fund our schools? Is it she? Yep. She asked if it's historical for schools to fund. I think it's who you ask. I think there are some folks that believe that K-12 education has already been properly funded and seen a huge swing since the major recession, and then some feel like it's not enough. So I think it's how you feel. I can't answer that. She asked if we're 48th funded in the nation. I think some people disagree on some of those numbers as well. So, yeah.
So for questions, Alexis might have a few minutes afterwards, but I'm sorry, I have to be timekeeper, and it's almost 10:30. So
yeah. I think public education stakeholders feel like we are not adequately funded. I think legislators at the Capitol, some feel like we are, some feel like we are not. And I'll stop there. Okay, I've got to speed up here. Mention the school district actuarial study. The study is available through the Department of Education, but I mean, ultimately, we learned, yes, school districts can participate. We learned that the state share, so right now the state is able to pay 80% and the employee pays 20%. That is different than school district, and this is not just Scottsdale. This looked at a lens of all school districts across Arizona. But that could be a challenge for school districts to participate because they can't pay in the 80%. Our kind of next question is, well, what if we did 70-30 instead? ADOA did affirm that there are potentially conversations on flexibilities on what this could look like for implementation. Also, there's a potential to have some sort of separate pool. So having the state employee pool and having the state school district pool, but administered by ADOA. So, really next steps is digging in with ADOA, and I know that Dr. Menzel has interest to do that, digging in with ADOA, like what does this look like? What would you need from Scottsdale? I personally think piloting this with a couple schools is probably the smartest decision for ADOA instead of just opening the floodgates to everyone. But there are going to be some really intentional conversations over the next couple of months to see what this could potentially look like. But ultimately, I believe there could be a good potential for cost savings for employees. It could it could be something that impacts the district, although maybe stuff like Prop 123, depending on how they renew it, could be utilized to subsidize this. All of this targeted at a retention strategy for teachers. Request to speak. She'll send the slides. As I mentioned, if anything on here you loved, anything on here offended you, you have the authority to create a request to speak account, and you can take positions on bills. You can sign up to testify on bills. You can go crazy on anything you want. It doesn't have to be education related. This is open to the public. I will say you create an account online, but you have to activate your account at the Capitol. But rest assured, I live there pretty much all the time. So if you create an account and you feel comfortable sharing your credentials, I can get you activated at the Capitol, and then you can take positions on bills, anything you want, anytime. And just sort of showing you what it looks like. This is my account. Questions? I think we've kind of rolled with questions, but feel free to reach out to me anytime. Truly, I live and breathe this world and really enjoy this work, so would love to stay connected with you all.
Okay, so we're going to fly through the rest of our slides. I will put her presentation on SPC's website. If you guys have any... So I'll put her presentation on the website. If you have any questions, let me know. I actually took a field trip with my kids a couple years ago to the state capitol and did RTS, so I can even answer some questions about that. It was actually a good fall break activity, so maybe spring break. Okay, any SPC reps have announcements? No? All right, the remainder of the meeting will be some quick executive board updates. So our next meeting is in February. It is an evening meeting. It'll be Wednesday, February 19th. We're gonna be talking about the state mandated assessments, right? We heard that several times today. They're in some of the bills. We'll hear from Leah Mitchell and Dr. Cindy Bachna. Our budget update, we had some grant income, email expenses came out, and then I think a school donation and another individual donation. I think those were the changes. You'll start seeing some of these signage. So we're gonna start a fundraising campaign. We're a 501c3 nonprofit, which means we rely on donations to cover our operating costs. And that is the only thing we spend money on. All of us who you might see, including me, on the mic are here as volunteers. Literally, we spend our money on really boring things like insurance, email, a post office box, the $10 fee for licensing through the state. None of it is exciting. If you want to see more information about what we spend money on, like I can give you Treasury, it's all open book. You do have to email me because, like I said, we're volunteers and I'm not the best about putting our budget updates on the website in a timely manner, but I can email them to you. Okay, so this is what we spend our money on, and we do, it's really easy to donate to us. We can take check, we can take Venmo, and we can take my favorite, which is Zelle. It's my favorite because we get 100% of it, and because it took me 2 years to figure out how to get the bank account to let me access it. All right, if you have any questions, you can always email me, president@Scottsdale Parent Council. If I don't know the answer, I can connect you with someone who does. And thank you so much for coming, and I hope to see you guys at future meetings.